we serve the forgotten investor. And what I mean by that is,
Welcome to InvestSmart with Steadily. I'm Darren Nix, the CEO of Steadily, and today we're talking with Kathy Fettke. She's a super interesting guest. She is the founder of RealWealth, a best-selling author, and she's a voice that many investors rely on to understand not just real estate, but how to manage your finances. So we're going to be talking about where investing is headed in 2025, navigating uncertainty, and how to stay sane while building long-term wealth in real estate. Kathy, welcome to the show. Kathy, would love to hear from you in your own words. What is RealWealth?
well, we serve the forgotten investor. And what I mean by that is the investor who is just too busy to do a fix and flip. They live in high-priced markets where it'd be really tough to make the numbers work. So they are forced to invest out of state, usually far away from where they live, and need something turnkey, I guess would be the best way to put it. Something that just doesn't take a lot of time or effort, but will still give them the results they're looking for. So we help busy professionals in high priced markets buy cash flowing rental properties in the fastest growing markets in the US.
And who pays for this? How does the investor, I would imagine it's not free to run this. So how do you support the cost of running this, and what does it cost the investors?
We are a brokerage, so we receive a referral fee from the broker on the other side of the deal. So anytime a real estate agent recommends you to another real estate agent, usually they get a kickback, so to speak, a part of the commission. So that's how we work too. It's a referral-based brokerage.
Great. So there's no out of cost or
No cost to the buyer at all. And what we found, at least, when I started investing over 25 years ago out of state, the hardest part was finding the team you can trust in a place you don't really know that well. So I got ripped off in all kinds of ways, trusting the wrong people and just not knowing where to turn or how that market works. So what we've done, well, once we got it figured out and started in the Dallas area and did really well, made lots of money in that growth market, I had a radio show in San Francisco and I was just talking about what I did. And our phones just rang off the hook saying, oh my gosh, I want to do that too. I want to get access to your agent and your property manager and your insurance agent and all the things, the repair guys, everything that you did to make these successful. And that's basically what we were like, wow, that sounds great. We'll do that. And how do we kind of turn that into a business? Because this is a lot of people asking. And of course, that's what we have now, helping people, providing them with a team that has been proven, that other investors have worked with successfully. And it's kind of a done for you deal.
And you mentioned Dallas versus San Francisco. Those are two of the most, I would say they're almost on the polar opposite ends of the extremes of properties. On the one hand, you have a rent-controlled, heavily regulated market in California. And then on the other hand, you have Texas, which is fairly freewheeling. So one of the questions I was wondering about is, can a property investor make money in a rent-controlled environment?
I wouldn't know. I won't do it. I just was born and raised in California, and I know that the laws really lean towards the tenant. So California is a great place to be a renter, for sure. To be a landlord, it's the laws really are not in your favor. And we saw that through COVID, where, I completely understand COVID was a difficult time. And renters were having a hard time paying their rent when they couldn't go to work. But should the landlord have to bear the burden of paying all the expenses of the mortgage and the insurance and everything because the tenant can't pay? And that was the case. There were no evictions during that time. And, no one wanted to evict anyone during COVID, but we didn't have to in other areas. We quickly found that in Texas, you got to pay your rent. That's the bottom line, because they understand that the owner has expenses. Not very many people own those properties outright. And even if they do, they've got insurance, they've got property taxes, they've got repairs they need to make. Should the landlord have to bear the burden, So anyway, I'm not a fan of investing in California, but people do it. So I assume they're making money. I don't know how you would in a rent controlled environment, but I'm not going to try to find it out.
I think that's wise advice. One of the other things I've been wondering about is you mentioned recently that fix and flip activity has had the biggest pullback since 2007. And do you perceive that to be a temporary blip, or has something structural changed about the market and the economics around fix and flips that you think are here to stay?
Well, material costs have certainly gone up over COVID. We know that we saw massive inflation and limited supply. It was difficult to get the materials you needed to do a flip. We have seen inflation come down, but the prices haven't really come down. Just inflation, the growth of inflation has slowed. So material costs are up, labor costs are up, and yet housing costs are not going up as quickly. It's really slowing down. So if you make mistakes in a flip, you've really got to be an expert. But let's say that you just don't bid it outright, or it takes you longer than you thought, or your costs in general, insurance costs and holding costs are higher. Certainly, lending costs are higher. You can kind of save your butt, so to speak, if prices have gone up. But if they haven't, or even worse, have gone down, boy, that's a recipe for disaster and losing money. So I think it's just harder. There's less inventory out there. When there's less inventory, it's kind of harder to find the distressed deal. There's not a lot of distress in real estate. The headlines state otherwise, but when you compare historically, most homeowners today have very low payments, very, very low mortgage payments. They have high equity. There's not a lot of distress. So, usually to be a good flipper, you need to find a distressed property and fix it up. So yeah,
Right.
I don't know that could change because we are starting to see inventory levels rise, more so in certain markets than others. But, just know that flipping is a very specific thing, and you've got to get it right. You've got to get your numbers right. You've got to get the buy price right. The bid has to be super accurate, which is hard to do because you don't really know what's behind the walls. And you need to know your exit price. You need to know what this is going to sell for. If you get any of those factors wrong, you could lose money.
So, speaking of inventory, one of the stories of the last 5 to 10 years has been the rise of the build to rent community. Some of the stats that I've seen say that 1 in 10 new builds is actually for a renter, and those are largely being driven by private equity. So, hot take, in 10 to 15 years, will we be renting mostly from private equity funds as opposed to individual landlords?
There has been a lot of fear about that it's going to be Wall Street owning all the homes. I don't see that happening. It's still a mom and pop industry. There's still millions of mom and pops who own one or two rental properties versus I think it's maybe up to 300 or 400,000 owned by Wall Street. They own just a tiny percentage of the rental properties out there. And I'm talking in the 1 to 4 unit. In multifamily, absolutely. They dominate there. Because it's a higher price point, right? But for Wall Street to come in and buy the kind of stuff we're buying, more like $200,000 properties, $200,000 to $300,000 properties, they'd like to put a few zeros on that. They have lots of money to deploy, and owning single family rentals isn't one of them. But build to rent is a way that a lot of institutional investors have figured it out. Like, hey, it's like a horizontal apartment. We know apartments. So we have seen more and more institutions come in and do that, but it has slowed down dramatically over the past couple of years because of everything I just said. Costs going up so dramatically, it's hard to make it pencil. Builders would rather make a profit, take the money and run versus holding it. But that's kind of good for us smaller guys. We are doing build to rent at RealWealth. We're building duplexes in San Antonio. We have several subdivisions nationwide. And, for us, because we're a smaller organization, we're nimble, we can make it work. And because we're not now kind of having to compete against so many institutional investors doing it, it's working out for us. Because you have to look at the big picture. And the big picture, if you just from a bird's eye view look at real estate, you have prices that are at all-time highs. You have high interest rates. And affordability is just as bad as it was in the 80s. And we know that it was bad in the 80s because you had double-digit interest rates. If you have interest rates at 18%, it's going to be hard to to afford real estate. But today, we're only at 6.5%, 7% interest rates, but the prices are so high that affordability is out of whack. And yet you have the largest generation in history at first-time home buying age, at family formation age, young people who are getting married, having children, pets. They maybe loved living in apartments in their 20s, but they're in their 30s now. The millennials are getting old. They're in their 30s and early 40s, and they, want a home. They, living downtown was cool for a while, but now they've got, they need a yard. So if they
So what
can't
you're saying
afford,
is now that I'm starting to get some eye wrinkles when I smile, it's time for me to move out of my rental.
Exactly. They can't afford maybe to buy it, but they'd still like to live in a home. And that's what the build to rent model provides.
This is a little bit of a change in direction, but you mentioned the economics and getting a property to pencil for the fix and flippers. More generally, if you think about the advice that you're providing to your members, are there any investments that you recommend that they make to harden their properties against future losses? I'm specifically thinking about things like installing a metal roof versus asphalt shingles. It's a much higher price point initially. And some folks will say, oh, but it pays dividends over time because you'll have fewer losses due to roof damage, et cetera. I'm not sure I believe that. And I'm curious to hear what you're hearing and what you advise to your members, and as far as fire resistance, wind resistance, et cetera.
Well, for sure, we like durable things that, materials that look great, but they last.
No worries. This is why we get to do editing and we don't record live.
This is why I love editing. So, we like to get vinyl plank floors. It looks like wood floors, but they last and they're easy to take care of. So we would be willing to put a little bit more money into a more durable product, but not too much. So, and again, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're flipping, you don't need that necessarily. You just need it to look good, and then you sell it and it's somebody else's problem, right? But if you're holding that property as a rental, your material choices are going to be a little different. You want it to last. You want it to be quality. You want your tenant to love it.
One of the last questions on these themes is Airbnbs. Incredibly hot for a long period of time. I should say vacation rentals more generally. Incredibly hot for a long period of time. What are you seeing these days? Is the opportunity still there?
It is for us. I'm actually really shocked. We have gosh, I don't know what's happening. I'm so sorry. It's like my sound. Oh, there we go. We bought a short-term rental more for personal use in Utah, near Park City.
Amazing.
And we wanted to be able to use it during the winter, but rent it when we're not using it. And then we thought, well, we'll never rent in the summer. This is a winter place. We just keep getting booked. And I learned from my daughter, actually, that she's one of those digital nomads who wants to live in a place for 30 days. And she said that the price at a short-term rental, if you go from 29 days to 30 days, is so affordable, it makes it work. And I thought, oh, I'm going to try that. So I gave a pretty big discount on the 30-day rental. And we're booked during the summer, and it's a good amount. So, it's less than it would be in the winter, which is high season, but it's still getting rented. So just for our personal experiences, it's been extremely lucrative. We're not huge short-term rental investors, and it always just depends on location, right? Where are you doing this, and what's the anchor? What I found with ours is we're right on the border of areas where it's maybe not allowed or there's really big restrictions. But if you're just outside of that and you don't have the same restrictions, you can get the bookings. So we have a couple of short-term rentals in California. That actually does work because we don't like to do 30-day stays, because then you're subject to California, landlord laws, which are not in your favor. But short-term rental could be a little better. So we're next to a beach community, but not in it. So people could still get to the beach in 10 minutes, but they don't have all the restrictions that the beach town has. So we can, we can do what we want, and it's better. So that's one way to make it work. Obviously, there's people that get their short-term rentals near big business or hospitals, and they're seeing a consistent, bookings there. So again, it just depends on your model. The median term rental is a really cool concept. Like I said, 30 days or more, but furnished. Traveling nurses love those. That's kind of a way to not have to be acting like a hotel. You're still a long-term investor, but a short-term, long-term investor, medium term.
Absolutely. I can jump in right there with a plug for Furnish Finder. We partnered with them some time ago, and they're seeing phenomenal growth on their platform because,
Yeah.
just to your point, there's a lot of folks that need mobility for 30 to 60 days, and they've filled that void.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I'd love to open up the floor for any parting thoughts that you have for our listeners.
Well, I can just say at RealWealth, a lot of our members work with you guys at Steadily and rave about it. Just really helps the process of, managing rentals. And we don't have a whole lot of fix and flip people, but I know that you probably do. So we're really pleased to be able to, have to be working with you guys, making the
Likewise.
job of a landlord a little bit easier.
Indeed. It's been wonderful talking with you today and really appreciate the partnership. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.